The scent of charred metal and alien spices lingered heavy in the air, a reminder of the life force exchanged here. Not merely goods, but beings with breath and thought. Clivenar Station stretched endlessly in all directions, a floating maze of market corridors and hollowed caverns suspended between the gravitational pull of twin dying stars. Dim orange light seeped through the fractured dome overhead, painting the market's wares and traders in hues of rust and blood. Daniel Carter stood motionless, his boots planted firmly on the grated floor as a throng of voices clamored around him. He wasn't here for bargains or curiosities. His eyes skimmed over the bizarre stalls, hovering bioluminescent flora encased in glass, robotic limbs twitching as if alive, and shimmering fabrics that shifted colors with every breath of stale air. Somewhere amidst the chaos was the humanitarian aid coordinator he'd come to meet, but already his unease grew. This station, this place, breathed desperation. A low hum rattled beneath his feet, the pulse of Clivenar's engines, ever present, like a predator's growl. People rushed past him, many not people at all but creatures whose forms defied human reckoning. A serpentine vendor hissed at him from the side, its translucent scales flashing a spectrum of colors as it waved a glowing shard in his direction. He waved it off. "Earthman," the vendor crooned, its voice sweetly poisonous. "The marketplace sees all. You're far from home." Daniel moved on, jaw tight, his instincts prickling. It was the way the shadows clung to the edges of his vision, the way eyes lingered on him a moment too long. The marketplace was no place for ideals, and he wore his too plainly. His hands brushed the satchel slung across his chest, heavy with supplies intended for displaced families on this wretched station. It felt as much a shield as a weight. He didn't see her at first. She was part of the crowd, a hooded figure moving silently, her steps unhurried amidst the frenzy. But he felt her presence, a shift in the air that turned his head without warning. She stood barely a dozen paces away, her frame hunched as if to make herself smaller, her crystalline skin catching faint glimmers of light beneath her cloak. When their eyes met, it wasn't her beauty that startled him, though it was undeniable. It was the desperation. "You," she said, her voice low, steady, but trembling at the edges. "You're from Earth." Daniel blinked, his mind racing. Was it his accent? His bearing? Before he could respond, she stepped closer, her hood falling away to reveal luminous skin that seemed to fracture light into a spectrum of impossible colors. Her eyes, too large for a human face, but undeniably expressive, locked onto his. "Please," she whispered, the word tight and urgent. She dropped to her knees before him, her movements so sudden they drew the attention of passers-by. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Get up," Daniel said, his voice harsh. His hands moved instinctively to lift her, but she shook her head vehemently. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "You must hear me. Take me as your slave." The words hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, he didn't respond, his brain struggling to process the absurdity. She spoke them so matter-of-factly, as if her plea carried no shame, only grim necessity. "What?" he said, his voice low but sharp. He glanced around, his instinct screaming at him to pull her to her feet, to end this spectacle, but she remained motionless. "Take me as your slave," she repeated, her voice firmer now. "Please. If you don't, they will." "They?" Daniel's voice was barely audible now. He followed her gaze, his stomach sinking as he noticed a group of figures lingering at the edge of the marketplace. They were armored, their faces hidden behind sleek black helmets. Vulgarn Consortium enforcers. The pieces began to align in his mind, though they formed a picture he didn't want to see. "You don't need—" "I have no choice," she interrupted, her voice tinged with frustration. "Do you think I want this? Alone, I am a target. To them, I'm no different from the others on the auction blocks." Her hand, slender and trembling, gestured subtly toward a platform where a line of bound beings, of countless species, awaited their fates. Daniel took a step back, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't why he'd come here. He was supposed to help those he could, distribute supplies, offer medical aid, maybe arrange transport for refugees. Not this. "I won't do it," he said finally, his voice hard. "I don't own people, not here, not anywhere." Her expression shifted. Despair flickered, followed by something sharper. Resolve. She stood, her movements fluid despite the tension in her body. "Then help me another way," she said, her voice now laced with a quiet fury. "Protect me. Let them think you've claimed me if that's what it takes. If you leave me now, they'll come for me, and you'll have to live with what they'll do." Daniel didn't answer immediately. The enforcers were moving now, their predatory gazes fixed on them. He felt the weight of his satchel again, the burden of his mission twisting into something heavier. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. "Iriana," she said. "Iriana," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. His mind raced. His options were limited. He could walk away, let this place swallow her whole. But something in her eyes, something raw and achingly familiar, refused to let him. "Stay close," he said finally, his tone resigned. "And don't say a word." Her relief was palpable, but she didn't thank him. There was no time. Together, they moved deeper into the labyrinth of the marketplace, shadowed by the cold, unyielding presence of the enforcers. Unseen by either of them, Colonel Vrexis stood on a balcony overlooking the scene, his gloved hands resting lightly on the railing, his helmeted head tilted slightly as he watched the Earthman lead the Tsellar woman into the shadows. "Interesting," he murmured, his voice like a blade scraping against steel. "Very interesting." The marketplace, once a cacophony of alien voices and mechanical cries, now felt eerily quiet. The shadows stretched long, as if the station itself were holding its breath, watching Daniel and Iriana slip deeper into the maze of darkened corridors. Their steps echoed against the metal, the only sound in an otherwise oppressive silence. Daniel's mind raced, each movement calculated, but never fast enough to outrun the weight of his decision. He had pledged to help her, but the cost of that promise was beginning to unravel before him. Iriana walked beside him, her shoulders pulled tight, her eyes darting nervously around them. Her silence was unnerving. Her presence, so vivid and strange, now felt like a shadow that loomed over him. She was a puzzle, a mystery with edges he couldn't quite grasp. But he had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. "Stay close," he muttered, though he was already acutely aware of how close she was. Her crystalline skin shimmered faintly in the dim light of the station's underbelly, her presence both alien and oddly comforting. She seemed to pulse with energy, as though the station itself was drawing from her, feeding off her. His mind drifted back to her plea, the way her words had cut through him, a simple request made with such conviction. He had never felt the weight of another's need so strongly before. As they turned a corner, Daniel's hand instinctively went to his side, where his blaster rested beneath his coat. The enforcers were still out there, hunting. He could feel their eyes on him, as though the very walls of the station were pressing in closer, trapping him in a web of consequences he hadn't expected to weave. Iriana glanced up at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. "They are close," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should move faster." Her words chilled him. He wasn't sure how she knew, but the quiet certainty in her tone made his instincts flare. He had been trained to sense danger, but her senses, far more acute than his, had been honed by an entirely different life, a life in constant peril, a life where survival was measured in seconds. "I'm aware," he replied, his voice strained. He quickened his pace. "You're sure they're after you?" Her eyes flickered to the ceiling as if listening to a sound only she could hear. "Not just me, you too. They are curious about the Earthman who has a Zelar by his side." A lump formed in his throat. The situation was spiraling faster than he could control. "Why me?" he asked. The question hung between them, unanswered. She didn't seem to know, and that only deepened the mystery. They passed a series of doors, old, rusted, mechanical, that opened into narrow corridors filled with the smell of something rotten. The air was thick with the scent of decay. He moved cautiously, but his hand remained on the blaster, ready to draw at the first sign of danger. The corridor was narrow, a dead end in a place that offered no easy escape. His heart hammered in his chest. "You need to find somewhere safe," Daniel muttered. Iriana didn't answer. Her gaze drifted past him to a flicker of movement, a shadow that passed too quickly to be human. The air grew heavier, thick with the feeling of eyes on them. "They're coming," she whispered again. "We don't have much time." Before Daniel could respond, a loud bang echoed through the corridor, like a door slamming open or a fist against metal. From the far end, the sound of boots on metal reverberated down the narrow passage. His hand went to his blaster, fingers trembling with urgency. "You're sure you can fight?" Iriana asked. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of fear that didn't escape him. "I'm not here to fight," Daniel growled. "I'm here to get you out." But they were running out of time. A figure appeared in the distance, moving too quickly to be anything but a threat. A gleaming helmet reflected the low light, a soldier of the Vulgran Consortium. Another step, another soldier. The first enforcer stopped dead in his tracks, and Daniel's heart skipped a beat as the figure lifted a rifle with unsettling precision. "You're not going anywhere," the enforcer's voice came, muffled through the helmet's voice modulation. It was a command, not a question. Daniel's mind raced. He reached for his blaster, but Iriana was faster. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had been running for far too long. Her crystalline skin seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. As she raised her hand, fingers outstretched toward the enforcer. The air between them shimmered. For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a sudden force that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the corridor, the enforcer was thrown backward, crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. The blaster slipped from his hands, his helmet clanging against the metal floor. Iriana lowered her hand, her breathing shallow, and for the first time since they'd met, Daniel saw the weight of exhaustion settle in her eyes. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "I don't know," she replied softly. "But they will come harder now." As if on cue, a crackling voice echoed down the corridor. "Vrexis will not be pleased," the voice hissed. It was another enforcer, and judging by the subtle echo of his footsteps, there was more than one. They were closing in. "I'm not looking to make his day any worse," Daniel muttered, pushing Iriana forward. "We need to move." The escape was a frantic scramble, through dark, narrow alleys, past long-forgotten storage rooms piled high with discarded technology and rusting equipment. Daniel's mind spun, but he kept his feet moving. Iriana stayed close, her presence like a weight and a promise. Every so often, Daniel would catch a glimpse of her glowing skin, her eyes scanning the dark for threats, though he was increasingly certain that it wasn't the shadows she feared. It was the enforcers, the consortium. But what did they want with her? What secret did she carry? And why was he still tangled in her fate? The sound of the enforcers' pursuit grew louder, more frantic. They had only seconds to act. Daniel's mind worked quickly. He had to find a way to slow them down, to buy them time. Ahead, he saw an opening, a narrow gap in the walls that led to a stairwell down to the station's lower levels. The perfect place to disappear, to lose themselves in the shifting underbelly of Klivinar. "Iriana, this way," he hissed, pulling her toward the stairwell. She hesitated only for a moment before following, her eyes flickering back to the dark corridor they had just left. It was then that he heard it, footsteps pounding, a low mechanical whine that sent a cold shiver up his spine. They weren't alone anymore. Something else was hunting them, something faster than the enforcers, and it was closing in. The stairwell plunged deeper into the belly of Klivinar Station, its walls coated in the grime of forgotten years, thick black sludge that seemed to pulse with the station's very heartbeat. Daniel's boots rang out against the metallic steps, each echo a reminder of how close the enforcers were. But it wasn't just them he feared now. the sound of something else, something more sinister, came from behind them. Low, almost imperceptible, like a hiss rising from deep within the bowels of the station. Iriana's steps were quieter, almost predatory. Her body moved with a fluid grace, her crystalline skin reflecting the sparse light from the dim, flickering overhead lamps. Her face remained unreadable, though Daniel could feel the tension radiating off her. She wasn't just afraid for her life anymore, she was afraid of something she hadn't yet shared. "How much farther?" he asked, his voice tight. His hand gripped the blaster at his side, but he knew it wouldn't be enough, not for what was coming. "Not much," Iriana whispered, her voice distant. Her eyes flickered briefly to his, and in that fleeting moment, Daniel saw something, an unspoken plea, a burden too heavy for her to carry alone. She wasn't merely hiding from the enforcers, she was hiding from herself. They descended deeper, the air growing colder, thicker with an unnatural dampness. There were no signs of life in the lower levels, only the mechanical hum of old machinery buried beneath layers of rust. It was the forgotten part of the station, unused, a ghost town of its own making. Finally, they reached the bottom. Daniel's hand shot out, pressing against the wall as they entered a vast, empty expanse of metal and dust. The lower levels of Clivenar were a labyrinth of derelict machinery, abandoned mining tunnels, and forgotten storage units. Yet in the stillness, it was as if the station had exhaled, letting them slip beneath its surface. "Here," Iriana said, her voice tight as she stopped. She turned to him, her face illuminated by the dim glow of the flickering lights. There was something in her expression now, something more urgent. "We need to talk," she said softly. Daniel's pulse quickened. "We don't have time for—" "Make time," she interrupted, her tone firm, sharp in a way he hadn't heard before. "You need to understand why they're after me." The silence between them thickened, and for the first time, Daniel felt the full weight of her words. They weren't just running for their lives. This was bigger than him, bigger than her. Something in the depths of her voice, a resonance that vibrated with truth, made him pause. "What do you mean?" he asked, the question coming out more fragile than he intended. Iriana closed her eyes, her breath shuddering. When she spoke again, her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the air with the weight of a confession. "My name isn't just Iriana." She paused, as if the words themselves were heavy, painful. "I'm not just at Cellar." Daniel stiffened. "What do you mean?" His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her story that had never quite made sense. Her plea, her desperation, the sudden, inexplicable strength she'd shown in the corridor when she sent the enforcer flying across the room. "I am the last of the House of Eleanor," she said, the words sharp as knives. "The ruling family of the Cellar, before the consortium slaughtered them. My lineage was, sacred to my people. And now it's a curse." Daniel stared at her, the puzzle pieces clicking together in a way that both astonished and terrified him. The Cellar were known for their empathic abilities, for their strange, almost otherworldly connection to the very fabric of the galaxy itself. But what she was saying, what she was revealing, was far beyond anything he could have imagined. The House of Elhanar had once ruled, but the consortium had obliterated them, and she, Iriana, was the last of their bloodline. "You're Daniel stammered, unable to find the right words. "I am the heir to a throne that no longer exists," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her revelation. "But my power, my bloodline, still holds a key." He couldn't believe what she was saying, not because he doubted her, but because it sounded like a nightmare made real. He had been caught in the wrong place, at the wrong time. He had no way of knowing how to help her, and yet he knew one thing for sure: the stakes had just been raised beyond anything he could have prepared for. "What do you mean by key?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Iriana's eyes darkened, her hands trembling at her sides. "I can feel it. I don't understand it completely yet. But there's something in me, something buried deep inside, something tied to my family's fall. It's what the consortium wants, what Colonel Vrexus wants. Her words hung in the air, thick with implications. The consortium wasn't after her because she was a Tsellar. They were after her because of her bloodline, because of what she carried within her. And whatever it was, it had the potential to change everything. Before Daniel could respond, the hiss returned, a low, guttural sound reverberating through the air like a serpent coiling in the dark. Iriana stiffened, her gaze snapping to the shadows at the far end of the hallway. "They know we're here," she said, her voice laced with dread. The footsteps came next, heavy, deliberate. They weren't human, not by any means. Something else was stalking them through the dark. Daniel's heart pounded as he looked around, his pulse quickening. The enforcers were too far behind for this to be their doing. This was something else, something worse. A faint, slithering sound scraped across the floor, like claws against metal. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, impossibly thin, its body swaying unnaturally as it moved. Its face was obscured by a mask of black metal, but the eyes, those eyes were glowing red, pulsing like a heartbeat. Daniel's throat tightened. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice low but firm. Iriana nodded, but there was a spark of defiance in her eyes. "No," she said quietly. "This is my fight too." The figure advanced, its movements predatory, almost hypnotic. It was no longer a question of who was chasing them. It was a question of what, and whatever it was, it had no intention of letting them leave this place alive. Daniel raised his blaster, his hand shaking. Iriana stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she reached out toward the creature. "Get ready," she whispered, her voice filled with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death more times than she cared to remember. The air between them shimmered, just as it had in the corridor when she had thrown the enforcer. This time, however, it was different. There was a strange, pulsing energy, a force Daniel couldn't comprehend, growing in strength. And as the creature lunged, everything went dark. The darkness came in a suffocating rush, a blanket that smothered sound and light, as though the very air had been drained from the space around them. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The last thing he remembered was the figure lunging toward them, its glowing eyes piercing through the dim light. And then, nothing. But now, in the blackness, there was a strange stillness, an absence of movement that chilled him more than any threat. His hand instinctively reached for the blaster at his side, but it was gone. His fingers brushed against cold metal, the barrel of the weapon slipping from his grasp as he tried to push himself up from the floor. He wasn't alone. He could feel it. Iriana was close. He could sense her presence, even in the thick darkness, as if the space between them hummed with some unseen force. "Iriana?" he whispered, the name escaping his lips more out of instinct than reason. There was no response. Panic flared inside him. "Iriana!" His voice was louder now, hoarse and desperate. He could hear the rasp of his own breath, but the silence that followed was deafening. No response, no movement, no sign of life. His mind reeled. What had happened to her? Had the creature taken her? Had she been injured? Was she... Suddenly, a faint glow cut through the blackness, a shimmer of blue like the flicker of a distant star. Daniel's eyes adjusted, and he saw her. She was standing, her back to him, her arms outstretched, as though reaching for something beyond the immediate space. The faint light seemed to emanate from her skin, casting an ethereal glow that reflected in the stillness of the air around them. "Iriana!" Daniel's voice cracked as he staggered toward her. She turned slowly, her eyes glowing with an intensity that both mesmerized and terrified him. But there was something different in her expression now, something more than the fear that had clouded her face earlier. It was calm, almost peaceful. "You're okay," Daniel breathed, the relief flooding through him. But the feeling was fleeting. The intensity in her eyes, an unnatural sharpness, told him something was amiss. "I'm not the same," she said, her voice soft but laced with something strange, something alien. "Not anymore." Her words hung in the air like a warning. He had seen her change before, her power surging unexpectedly, but this was different. The air around them felt charged, as if the very fabric of reality was warping, bending beneath her influence. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked, a sense of dread curling in his gut. Iriana's expression softened for a moment, as though she were struggling to find the right words. "I can feel it inside me. The power, my bloodline, it's waking up." She glanced down at her hands, her fingers trembling as she flexed them. The faint blue light pulsed with each movement, the glow growing stronger. "Waking up," Daniel repeated. "What power?" His voice was tight, disbelief mingling with fear. Her eyes met his, a silent understanding passing between them. "The consortium knew. They've been hunting me for years, not just for my survival, but for what I carry within me. My family's bloodline is more than a symbol of power. It's a weapon." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath his feet, the weight of her words sinking deep into him. She wasn't just the last of her people's ruling house. She was a living weapon, something more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. A distant sound pierced the silence, the low hum of mechanical footsteps, like a pulse in the deep, rhythmic and sure. The enforcers were still close. "We need to move," Daniel said, his voice urgent, pulling her toward the nearest exit, but she didn't budge. "I can't run anymore," she whispered, the words low but resolute. "I can't keep hiding." Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. "Iriana, we don't have a choice. We can't stay here." But her gaze, intense and unwavering, held him in place. "You don't understand. They won't stop coming. Not for me. Not for what I am. The power, my power, it's the key to ending all of this. Ending them." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "You're saying you can fight them? You can stop them?" She nodded slowly. "I can." The certainty in her voice was chilling. "But at what cost?" The question slipped from his lips before he could stop it. "What happens if you use this power? What happens to you?" For a long moment, Iriana said nothing. Her eyes were distant, as though she were seeing something beyond him, beyond their immediate reality. Then she met his gaze, her expression haunted. "I don't know. But I do know this. If I don't stop them now, they will destroy everything. My people, my history. It will all be lost. They will use it, weaponize it, turn it against us, against all of us." Daniel stood frozen, the weight of her words settling into his bones. His thoughts were a whirlwind. How could he ask her to sacrifice herself for a cause she didn't fully understand? But how could he stand by and do nothing while the enforcers hunted them? "Iriana," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "You don't have to do this alone. We can find another way." But she shook her head, a sadness flickering across her face. "There is no other way, Daniel. The choice has already been made." Daniel felt his world shift. This wasn't just about helping her anymore. It wasn't about running or hiding or evading the inevitable. She was asking him to let her become something else, something he didn't fully understand. And he knew, deep down, that this was her moment of reckoning. But it would be his, too. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. They were close now, too close to outrun. There was no more time. "I won't let them take you," Daniel said, his voice low and fierce. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers, but she stepped back. "No," Iriana whispered. "It's my burden to bear, and if I don't do this now, we'll lose everything. You've helped me survive. Now let me do this. For both of us." Her words cut through him like a blade, the finality in them making his chest tighten. This was her choice, and he couldn't stop her. "Then I'm with you," he said, his voice resolute, though it cracked with the weight of his own helplessness. Iriana's eyes softened, her fingers brushing his for a moment. There was a fleeting connection, a spark of understanding between them, before she turned toward the shadows, the light from her body now pulsing with an intensity that filled the space around them. The enforcers were almost here, but Daniel no longer feared them. Not for himself. He feared what Iriana was about to become. The room was still, the air thick with the hum of machinery, the quiet pulse of distant engines reverberating through the walls. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped, like the entire station held its breath. Iriana stood at the center, her eyes closed, her hands outstretched toward the ceiling. The faint, shimmering light around her flickered like starlight caught in a storm, intense, growing, expanding with each passing second. Daniel stood at the edge of the room, watching her, his pulse thrumming in his ears. Her presence was overwhelming, as if the very fabric of reality was bending beneath the weight of her power. He could feel the energy crackling in the air around them, an electric charge that buzzed against his skin, tugging at his thoughts, warping them. The force was almost tangible, a weight that pressed against his chest. But he didn't move. Not yet. He didn't have to. The door at the far end of the room crashed open with a resounding force, the heavy metal groaning as it gave way to the Vulgarn enforcers. Colonel Vrexis was at their head, his towering figure a dark silhouette against the blinding light that poured from Iriana. He stood motionless for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as they flicked between Daniel and the alien woman who had once been his prize. "Do you think you can stop this?" Vrexis's voice was a low growl, filled with derision. He stepped forward, his boots scraping against the metal floor. "This power, it's far beyond you, Tsalar. You cannot control it." Iriana's eyes snapped open. The light around her flared brighter, pulsating like the heartbeat of a dying star. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the universe itself. "Not beyond me, not beyond us." She raised her hand, and the energy around her surged like a living thing. Daniel could feel it too now, the pull of it, like an invisible tide that yanked at the very core of his being. For a brief moment, he thought he could hear the whispers of the Sellar's ancient past, voices that had long been silent, reverberating through her. It was the echo of a people long forgotten, whispers of the House of Elenar. Then the surge exploded outward, a shockwave that rippled through the room, sending Vrexis and his enforcers flying back, their bodies crashing into the walls. The force of it was nothing like anything Daniel had ever witnessed. It was as though the fabric of reality had torn apart for a moment, leaving only chaos in its wake. Vrexis groaned, struggling to push himself upright. His helmet had been cracked, revealing the twisted, scarred visage beneath. Blood seeped from the wound at his temple, but his eyes were still filled with rage. "You think this is victory?" he spat, his voice ragged with fury. "You have no idea what you're unleashing. The consortium will—" The words died on his lips as Iriana stepped forward, her presence overwhelming. The light around her dimmed, leaving only the eerie glow of her eyes. Daniel's heart twisted in his chest as he watched her. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force that could reshape the galaxy itself. "You're wrong," Iriana said softly, her voice filled with a quiet power. "This is not destruction. This is freedom." With a gesture, she lifted her hand again, and the energy in the room shifted. It no longer pushed outward like a weapon. It drew inward, focusing into a beam of raw, concentrated power. It cut through the air like a blade, the force of it pulsing in waves. The enforcers cowered, shielding their eyes, but Vrexis stood firm. But even he couldn't withstand it. The beam shot forward, striking him in the chest. The sound of his armor cracking under the force of the blast was deafening, followed by the sickening thud of his body hitting the floor. The room fell into silence, the only sound the ragged breaths of the remaining enforcers as they scrambled to retreat, but there was no escape. Daniel felt the weight of the moment, the tension slowly dissipating as the last of the enforcers fled. He was left standing in the stillness, staring at Iriana, who stood motionless at the center of the room, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her power was fading now, its intensity slowly draining, leaving only the remnants of its presence hanging in the air. "Iriana," Daniel breathed, his voice filled with awe and a deep sense of fear. He didn't know what she had become, But one thing was certain. She was no longer the woman he had first met. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his. There was something different in them now, something that reminded him of the stars themselves. "I'm free," she whispered. For a moment, Daniel didn't know what to say. The words felt inadequate, like they could never do justice to the enormity of the transformation he had just witnessed. She had unlocked something within herself, something powerful, something ancient, and in doing so, she had shattered the chains that had bound her for so long. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The door slid open again, and Daniel spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at his side. But it wasn't another enforcer. A woman stepped through the doorway, her face hidden beneath a dark cloak. She moved with purpose, her step silent as she approached them. The faint glint of something metallic, an emblem, flashed on her collar. "I'm glad I arrived in time," she said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "It seems the resistance is finally beginning to rise." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The woman's words were like a spark to dry tinder, instantly setting everything ablaze. The resistance, the fight against the consortium. Iriana's eyes flickered to the woman, and a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "It's just beginning." The woman nodded, as though she had expected nothing less. "We've waited a long time for this day. The Sellar's bloodline carries more than just the past. It carries the future." Daniel took a step forward, his mind still racing to catch up with the whirlwind of events. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. The woman's eyes glinted with a knowing smile. "You'll learn in time, but for now, you should both come with me. There's much to do. The galaxy is waking up." Iriana glanced at Daniel, and for the first time in a long while, there was no fear in her eyes, only hope. Daniel took her hand, feeling the pulse of something new, something brighter than the darkness that had chased them for so long. They were no longer running. They were standing at the precipice of something greater. The door slid shut behind them, and together they stepped into the unknown. The weight of the past was behind them now. Ahead lay only the future, a future that was theirs to shape. And as they walked into the fading light of the station, Daniel knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had changed, and so had they. But the real fight had only just begun. The winds howled like restless spirits, whipping the surface of Zathar's dark ocean into a frenzy of towering waves. Rain lashed against the observation dome where Adrian Vale sat, the rhythmic pounding a stark reminder of how alien this place was. The dome, a fragile-looking construct of reinforced glass and alloy, clung precariously to a jagged rock outcropping. Beyond its protective barrier, the sea roared, a swirling tempest of fury and secrets. Adrian adjusted the sensors on his console, their dim glow casting an eerie light over his face. His mission here was simple, or at least it had been when he'd accepted it. Cataloging marine ecosystems on an uncharted world was supposed to be a peaceful endeavor, a chance to explore the vast unknown. Yet, in the week since his arrival, something about Zathar had gnawed at him. The ocean felt alive in a way he couldn't explain, its currents pulsing with an energy that seemed almost sentient. And tonight, that feeling was stronger than ever. The radar pinged softly, a blip amidst the chaos. Adrian leaned forward, brushing damp hair from his eyes. The signal was faint, erratic, but unmistakably there. Something moved in the water, its pattern irregular, almost desperate. A whale? He frowned, doubtful. The creatures he'd observed here moved with a fluid grace, their immense forms barely disturbing the currents. This was different. Another ping, closer. Adrian's stomach tightened as he peered into the storm-laden sea. The floodlights on the dome's exterior fought valiantly against the darkness, illuminating only a churning void. Yet, as he squinted, he thought he saw movement, a flash of silver amidst the waves. Not a whale, he realized. Something smaller, humanoid in shape. The thought made his pulse quicken. A swimmer. Impossible. The waters here were unforgiving, their crushing pressure and freezing temperatures lethal to unprotected life. Yet there it was again, the shape surfacing briefly before vanishing beneath a frothy crest. Adrian hesitated for only a moment before grabbing his rebreather and emergency harness. Every protocol screamed at him to stay inside, to log the anomaly, and wait for calmer conditions. But the image of that figure in the water, so fragile against the vast chaos, was impossible to ignore. Against his better judgment, he activated the airlock and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a hammer, tearing at his clothes and stealing his breath. Rain stung his skin, cold and relentless, as he made his way down the slick platform that extended from the dome. The sea loomed ahead, a writhing mass of black and white, its waves crashing against the structure with deafening force. He secured the harness to the platform's edge, double-checking the line before slipping into the frigid water. The cold was a shock, a biting embrace that seeped through his suit and into his bones. Adrian forced himself to focus, his eyes scanning the tumultuous sea for any sign of the figure. The rebreather hissed softly as he dove, the world above fading into a haze of muted thunder and rain. The underwater landscape was a chaotic ballet of motion, the currents pulling him in every direction. Visibility was minimal, the floodlights from the dome barely piercing the gloom. Still, he pressed on, following the faint signal on his wrist scanner. There. A glimmer of movement below him, tangled in a thick mass of kelp. Adrian swam closer, his heart pounding. As he neared, the figure came into focus. A woman, her body limp, her long hair swirling like ink in the water. She wasn't human. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent sheen, reflecting the faint light in hues of blue and silver. Thin, translucent fins extended from her arms and legs, torn and trailing blood. Gills along her neck fluttered weakly, struggling against the current. Adrian's breath caught as he realized she was still alive, albeit barely. He reached for her, his movements slow and deliberate. She didn't react, her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven rhythms. Carefully, he untangled her from the kelp, her body unnaturally light in his arms. The scanner on his wrist began to shriek, a warning he didn't have time to decipher. The currents around him shifted violently, pulling harder, as if the ocean itself resisted his interference. Adrian kicked upward, his legs burning with effort. The surface seemed impossibly far, the weight of the storm pressing down on him. Just as his lungs began to ache, he broke through, gasping for air as the rain pelted his face. The platform was a blur in the distance, its lights faint against the storm's wrath. He swam toward it, the woman still cradled in his arms. Each stroke felt heavier than the last, the waves battering him relentlessly. By the time he reached the ladder, his limbs were numb, his strength all but spent. He hauled her onto the platform with the last of his energy, collapsing beside her. For a moment he lay there staring up at the dark sky, the rain mingling with the salty sting of the sea. Then he turned his attention to her. Up close, she was even more striking. Her features were sharp and angular, her eyes, now half open, glowing faintly in the dim light. She coughed weakly, water spilling from her lips, and Adrian realized with a jolt that her gills were damaged, struggling to function. "Hey," he said, his voice hoarse. "Stay with me." Her gaze locked onto his, and for a fleeting moment he saw something in her expression: fear, confusion, and a flicker of anger. She tried to sit up, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, but her strength failed her. "Easy," Adrian urged, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now." Her lips parted, and she rasped a word in a language he didn't recognize. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, she grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes bore into his, and he felt an unspoken warning, a sense that her arrival was no accident. Before he could say another word, her hand fell away, and she slumped into unconsciousness. The storm raged on around them, but for Adrian the real storm had only just begun. Adrian paced the observation platform, his boots tapping against the slick metal, as he kept an eye on the unconscious woman, now lying on a padded examination table inside the dome. The storm outside continued its violent dance, the howl of the wind and the crashing waves creating a constant, oppressive backdrop. His fingers twitched, a restless energy that matched the tension in the air. His mind spun with questions, each one more troubling than the last. Who was she? What had happened to her? How had she ended up in the Zethar Ocean, miles from any known settlement, fighting against the storm like a creature of the sea itself? There was something about her that defied logic, an underlying mystery that gnawed at him, making his pulse quicken whenever he dared to consider it. But it wasn't just her strange appearance or her miraculous survival that disturbed him. It was the way her eyes had locked onto his before she passed out, the intense, unwavering gaze that seemed to pierce straight through him as if she could see into the very core of his being. And her grip, her strength had been unnatural. It wasn't the feeble grasp of someone desperate, it was the unyielding clutch of a warrior. He glanced back at the woman, noting how her iridescent skin shimmered faintly in the dim light of the examination room. Her body still radiated an otherworldly energy, an aura that unsettled him, even as his scientific curiosity itched to uncover her secrets. His scanner had identified her as alien, of course, no surprise there, but the more detailed readings had failed to make sense. Her biology was unlike anything he had encountered. Her organs and systems were a complex blend of terrestrial and alien, twisted into forms that felt both familiar and profoundly foreign. His fingers hovered over the diagnostic panel, then paused. He could run another scan, gather more data, but a deeper, more insistent question pressed at the back of his mind. What if he was uncovering something far beyond his understanding? What if, just like the storm outside, there were forces at play far too powerful for him to control? His gaze shifted to the woman's face again. She hadn't stirred in hours, her breathing slow and steady. Her injuries were severe. Bruises, cuts, and the faint signs of long-term physical trauma marred her body. He had done what he could to stabilize her, treating her wounds with what little supplies he had at hand. But there was no mistaking it. She had been through something far worse than a simple accident. Her name, her species. The words she had spoken in her unconscious state, foreign and strange to his ears, echoed in his mind. Zethar. The name meant nothing to him, but the way she had said it, the weight in her tone, suggested something more, something he wasn't yet ready to comprehend. He exhaled slowly, tension pooling in his chest. He could feel the pull of uncertainty, an overwhelming urge to distance himself from the whole situation. If she woke and gave him no answers, if she was as dangerous as she seemed, then what? But that was the coward's way out. He wasn't a coward. Not yet. Before he could gather his thoughts, the woman stirred. A slight, involuntary movement at first, but it was enough to snap his attention back to her. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light, unnaturally bright, like twin lanterns in the darkness. He leaned in, his heart thumping in his chest. "Hey," he said softly, unsure if she could hear him. "You're safe now." For a moment she blinked, disoriented. Her lips parted, a soft rasp escaping her throat, and her hand, still startlingly strong, shot out to grip his wrist again, this time with more purpose. "Where am I?" Her voice was rough, thick with exhaustion, but her tone was clear, almost commanding. She wasn't asking for pity. She was asking for facts. Adrian's throat tightened as he met her gaze. "You're on my ship. I found you in the ocean." He paused, unsure how much to reveal, how much he should share with this enigmatic stranger. You were almost drowned." Her fingers tightened around his wrist, and for a second, it felt like she was about to crush the bone in his arm. Her strength was overwhelming, and Adrian stiffened instinctively. She seemed to realize the danger of her grip and immediately let go, her expression flickering with something like embarrassment. But her eyes, those eyes, remained fixed on him, sharp and unblinking. "I was betrayed," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "Left to die." The words hung in the air like a spell, a confession that shifted the very tone of the room. Betrayal. Adrian's heart sank as the implications of her statement unfolded in his mind. She had been abandoned, cast adrift in a hostile world, alone in the vastness of an alien ocean. And yet, there was no sign of fear in her eyes. Only rage, only the burning remnants of a past she was clearly unwilling to forget. "What happened?" Adrian found himself asking, the question slipping from his lips before he could stop it. She hesitated as if weighing the cost of her next words. "I was once a champion of my people, a warrior among the Zathar." Her voice wavered slightly. "But they turned on me, betrayed me." Her lips curled in disdain as she spat the words like poison. "A coup, Krylos Rin." She trailed off, her eyes flickering with recognition at Adrian's blank expression. "You wouldn't know him, but he is the one who ordered my exile. He is the one who left me to drown." Adrian's mind raced, trying to piece together what she had said. Zathar, Krylos Rin. These were names and concepts he couldn't begin to understand. His training had never prepared him for this. He was a xenobiologist, not a diplomat, and certainly not a warrior. But there was something in her voice, something urgent, that made him feel the weight of her story, even if he couldn't fully grasp its meaning. "Why did you come here?" he asked cautiously, the question escaping him before he realized its importance. Her gaze softened, and for the first time since he had found her, her grip on him loosened. She closed her eyes for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. "I was coming for help," she said, her voice low. "A chance to stop the madness. But now I owe you my life." Adrian's brow furrowed in confusion. "Help? From me?" She nodded slowly, her fingers curling into a fist. "Yes, you have something I need." He was about to ask what, but she stopped him with a sharp motion, as if to say it wasn't the time. Instead, her eyes met his once more, and Adrian felt the weight of her unspoken words. Her secrets were vast, and they were dangerous. And now, somehow, he was caught in the midst of them. Just then, the quiet hum of the ship's console interrupted their silence. A soft beep. Adrian's eyes darted to the screen, his heart skipping a beat. The radar had detected something. Or rather, someone. A ship. Heading straight for them. Adrian's breath caught in his throat as the console beeped again, this time louder, more insistent. The blip on the radar was unmistakable. Something large, something fast, moving toward them through the churning storm. His pulse quickened, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. It wasn't just the storm outside that made the air feel thick with tension. It was the knowledge that someone or something was closing in. He turned back to Soraka, her intense gaze now fixated on the screen. She had already heard the sound, and her eyes were sharp, calculating. "They found us," she said softly, the words carrying a weight that made Adrian's stomach tighten. "He's come." "He?" Adrian's voice was a breathless whisper as he turned toward her, his mind racing. "Who is it? What's happening?" "Krylos Rin," Soraka replied, her voice colder than he had ever heard it. "The one who betrayed me. The one who sent his men to finish the job." Adrian's mind spun. Krylos Rin, her enemy, the one who had cast her adrift, was here, or at least his forces were. The reality of the situation hit him with full force. They weren't just hiding from a storm anymore. They were hiding from something far more dangerous, something far more calculated. "I have to move the ship," Adrian muttered, already moving to the control panel. His hands were shaking slightly, but his mind was razor-sharp, focusing on the task ahead. He had spent years in space, navigating through asteroid fields and volatile planetary atmospheres. But this was different. This wasn't a routine mission. This was a fight for survival. Soraka was already on her feet, her movements fluid and precise. Despite her injuries, Despite the exhaustion that had drained her body, she stood with the grace of a warrior, poised, unwavering. She reached for her weapon, the sleek, sharp-edged blade that had been secured by her side when Adrian had found her. But she hesitated. "You're not going to fight them," Adrian said, his voice firm. "We're not ready for that. Not yet." Her eyes flashed with a dangerous glint, the fire of a warrior who had spent her life in battle. "I don't need to fight them to win." She stepped toward him, her step silent as she crossed the distance between them. "I have a way to make them hesitate, but we need to move now." Adrian didn't need to ask what she meant. He knew that the storm, the rough seas, and the vast alien landscape were only part of the danger that awaited them. Krylos Rin's forces wouldn't hesitate. They would come for her with everything they had. And if they were able to get their hands on the technology Soraka had promised him, Adrian wasn't sure what would happen, but he didn't want to find out. Without another word, he set the ship into motion, navigating the turbulent atmosphere with practiced precision. The storm outside raged even harder, the violent waves crashing against the hull with the force of 1,000 fists. The sky above them was dark, a roiling mass of clouds and lightning that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. But through it all, Adrian's mind was focused on one thing: survival. "Where are they?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "How far away are they?" "Close," Soraka answered, her eyes scanning the radar, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "They'll be here within minutes, but we can't outrun them. Not in this weather, but we don't need to." She turned her gaze toward Adrian, her eyes full of something: resolve, fear, or maybe something deeper that he couldn't understand. "You need to trust me. We need to leave the ship." Adrian's mind raced as he processed her words. "Leave the ship?" he repeated, his voice a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "Are you out of your mind? We're out there in the middle of the ocean and you want us to leave the only place where we're safe?" Soraka didn't flinch. Her expression remained cold, unreadable. "The ship won't protect us from what's coming. The Zathar have their own way of finding what they want. They won't stop until they have me, and you, if it means getting to me." Adrian's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of her words settle deep in his bones. But the ship, it was his only means of escape, his only advantage. Without it, they were sitting targets. Still, something in her eyes made him hesitate, made him wonder if there was something more to this that he wasn't seeing. "Do you have another plan?" he asked, his voice quieter now, a reluctant admission of his doubt. "Yes." She nodded once. "Follow me." Before he could ask more questions, she turned and headed for the rear hatch, her body moving with a purpose that was almost mechanical. Adrian followed, his mind churning with 1,000 thoughts. He was no stranger to danger, no stranger to the unknown. But this felt different. This felt like stepping into the unknown with no safety net to catch him. Still, he followed her. If there was even a sliver of a chance they could escape, survive, he would take it. The hatch slid open with a hiss, and they were greeted by the raw force of the storm. Wind whipped through the opening, salty ocean spray stinging their skin. The waves crashed against the hull, their monstrous power threatening to tear the ship apart. Adrian's heart hammered in his chest as he followed Soraka out onto the narrow platform extending from the ship. The wind nearly knocked him off balance, and the howling gusts made it impossible to hear anything beyond the deafening noise of the storm. But Soraka moved with confidence, her every step sure and steady. "What's the plan?" Adrian shouted over the din, his words barely audible. "Where are we going?" "We're going to the island," she called back, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "It's the only place they won't expect us to be." "The island?" Adrian echoed, his mind struggling to make sense of her words. "What island? There's nothing on the radar." "There's a reason for that," she said cryptically, casting a glance toward the horizon. Her gaze hardened, and for a brief moment, Adrian could see a flicker of something, danger, resolve, perhaps even hope, flashing in her eyes. "That's where the real battle begins." The air around them seemed to crackle with energy as the first of Krylos's ships appeared on the horizon. The sleek, dark vessels cut through the storm like knives through butter, their engines thrumming with an unnatural hum. Adrian's chest tightened, but Soraka was already moving, her pace quickening as she led the way. This was no longer just a battle for survival. This was the beginning of something far larger than either of them had anticipated, and Adrian had no idea what kind of hell they were about to walk into. The island loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the roiling sky. Its silhouette, stark and unforgiving, seemed to rise out of the ocean like some ancient titan, silent in its dark majesty. The storm had intensified, the winds now howling with a ferocity that seemed to challenge their every step. But Soraka led the way without hesitation. Each stride was calculated, purposeful, like a predator stalking its prey. Adrian stumbled in the wind, his hands gripping the slick, wet surface of the platform as he tried to keep up. The ship was already far behind them, the churning waters now a distant memory, swallowed up by the fierce tempest that surrounded them. His heart pounded in his chest, an unrelenting drumbeat as the sky flashed with violet lightning, momentarily illuminating the scene in terrifying clarity. "Keep up!" Soraka's voice cut through the storm, harsh and urgent. Adrian's breath came in sharp bursts, his lungs burning from the cold, salty air. He could feel the tremors in his hands, the weight of the situation pressing on him like an invisible force. He had been in danger before, on planets ravaged by war, in the depths of alien jungles teeming with hostile creatures. But none of that had prepared him for this. The stakes were no longer theoretical. They were real, tangible. And the deeper they went into this unknown territory, the more it seemed like the weight of the universe itself was closing in around them. The island grew larger, its outline clearer. Black rocks jutted up from the earth, sharp and dangerous, like the remnants of some catastrophic event. The air tasted metallic, heavy with the scent of ozone. Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far worse than they realized. "What's here?" Adrian shouted, struggling to be heard over the wind. "A sanctuary," Soraka replied, her voice taut with the edge of something darker. "Once, it was a place of power, before Krylos's betrayal, before everything changed." Adrian's thoughts raced. He had known that Soraka's past was tangled in bloodshed and loss, but the magnitude of it was starting to become clearer. This island, this forgotten place, could it hold the key to everything that had brought them to this point? Could it be the reason Krylos was hunting her so relentlessly? His mind was still reeling when Soraka stopped abruptly, her gaze snapping to something just ahead. Adrian followed her line of sight, heart leaping into his throat. There, standing at the edge of the island's cliffside, were figures, dark shapes, silhouetted against the flickering lightning. "They're here," Soraka said, her voice a low hiss. Adrian's pulse spiked. He barely had time to react before a sharp cry cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable hum of energy weapons charging. The first bolt of light cracked through the air, slamming into the rock just inches from where Adrian stood. His instincts kicked in before his mind could catch up. He dropped to the ground, pulling Soraka with him, as the barrage of energy blasts tore into the cliffside above them. "Move!" Soraka snarled, already on her feet, her warrior instincts alive and dangerous. She didn't wait for him to catch up. She never did. Adrian scrambled to his feet and followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who are they?" Adrian shouted, barely able to hear himself over the sounds of combat. "Krylos's enforcers," Soraka replied without turning around. "His personal guard, trained to kill, programmed to obey. They'll stop at nothing to capture me, and you." The realization hit Adrian like a hammer strike. This wasn't just about saving Soraka anymore. It was about survival. He wasn't just a researcher. He wasn't just someone caught in the crossfire of an ancient war. He was now a target, an unwilling participant in a deadly game with stakes higher than anything he had ever imagined. Adrian's mind raced, but Soraka's voice cut through his thoughts. "Stay close. Follow my lead, and we might survive this." Before he could answer, she was already in motion, moving toward a narrow passage between the rocks. Adrian followed, his breath ragged, his eyes scanning the cliffs around them for any sign of the attackers. There was no time for hesitation, no time for second guesses. The storm had turned the landscape into a labyrinth of shadow and jagged stone. The wind was relentless, battering them from every direction. But Soraka's movements were fluid, each step calculated, each decision sharp. It was clear she knew this place, knew how to use the terrain to her advantage. Adrian had no choice but to trust her. "Up ahead," Soraka said, pointing toward a cave entrance hidden in the side of the cliff. "We'll make our stand there." They reached the cave just as another blast of energy tore into the rocks, sending debris flying in all directions. Adrian dove inside, his body slamming into the cool, wet stone. Soraka followed, her eyes scanning the darkness as they moved deeper into the cave. "What now?" Adrian gasped, his lungs still burning from the sprint. Soraka didn't answer immediately. She was looking around, her sharp eyes flicking over every detail of the cave. The walls were smooth, worn down by centuries of erosion, but there was a strange energy in the air, almost like the very stones were alive with some forgotten power. "We wait," she said finally, her voice low. "They'll come." Adrian didn't know how long they stayed in that cave. Minutes, hours. The storm outside continued to rage, but it felt as though time had lost all meaning in this hidden sanctuary. His mind was whirling with questions, but there was one burning in the back of his mind, one that he couldn't ignore any longer. "Why did you bring me here, Soraka?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. "This place, it's more than just an island, isn't it? You didn't bring me here to hide. You brought me here for a reason." Soraka's gaze met his, and for the first time, Adrian saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a flicker of something deep and ancient, something that had been buried beneath the years of rage and betrayal. "I brought you here because you're the only one who can help me stop Krylos," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This island, it's a sanctuary, yes, but it's also a prison that holds the key to everything, the technology, the power, and the betrayal that has torn my people apart. And now, it's our only chance." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. He had known this moment was coming, but the weight of it, the enormity of what Soraka was asking him to do, was heavier than anything he could have imagined. They were standing at the edge of something vast, something world-changing, and the choices they made here would ripple through the galaxy for generations to come. "You want me to help you take down Krylos?" Adrian asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "After everything he's done, everything you've been through?" "I don't want to," Soraka replied, her tone hardening. "I need to, and so do you." The storm outside howled louder, and Adrian knew, with sudden clarity, that the storm within was just beginning. The air was thick with the weight of silence. Adrian stood at the edge of the precipice, staring down at the vast abyss that lay before him. The storm had passed. The winds had died, leaving the island eerily still, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. His eyes traced the jagged rock formations that stretched into the distance, each one a reminder of the monumental battles fought here, battles that were, in many ways, just beginning to come to an end. Soraka stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The light was fading from the sky, a soft twilight glow that seemed to hang between night and day, between the past and the future. They had come so far, through trials that had torn them both apart and bound them together in ways neither of them had expected. But this final moment, this final choice, would change everything. "You're quiet," Soraka said, her voice low, carrying the weight of everything they had fought for. Adrian turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. The woman who had once been a stranger, a warrior, a fugitive, an enigma, was no longer just someone he had followed into danger. She had become something more, something that tethered him to this place, to this moment. The truth was, he had always been tied to her, from the very first moment he had stepped onto her world. Her battles had become his battles, her losses his own. "I'm thinking about what comes next," he said, his voice rough with the rawness of the emotions he'd held in check for so long. Soraka's lips curled into a wry smile. "I don't think you'll find much peace on the other side, Adrian. You know as well as I do that once you step through that door, there's no turning back." Adrian's heart tightened. The truth hung between them, heavy and undeniable. The door she referred to wasn't a literal one, it was a figurative one. The culmination of everything they had learned, everything they had survived. Beyond that door was a world remade. The choice was simple, yet staggering. Fight for what they had uncovered, for the secrets of Krylos's betrayal, or leave it all behind and disappear into the shadows, leaving the past to consume itself. A cold wind stirred, sending a shiver down Adrian's spine. "We could leave," he said, the thought slipping from his lips before he could stop it. "Leave it all behind. We've already been through enough, right? No more wars, no more betrayal, just us." Soraka turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing as if weighing his words with a seriousness that cut through the lingering doubt in his voice. "You think we can just leave? After everything? You saw what Krylos is capable of. You saw the forces he controls. If we walk away, do you really think he'll let us?" Adrian's eyes flicked to the horizon again. The stars were beginning to pierce the twilight, faint and distant, but there was a feeling in the air, a subtle shift, a final movement in the currents of fate. The truth had been laid bare before them both. They had seen the full picture. Krylos, his treachery, the legacy of his people, and the far-reaching consequences of inaction. Adrian's pulse quickened as the realization struck him hard. Leaving was not an option. There was no peace to be had, no safety, not for them, not for the galaxy. The door they faced was not an escape, it was the only path forward. "We can't," Adrian whispered, more to himself than to Soraka. "It's not just about us anymore, is it?" "No," she said softly. "It never was." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of finality. The fight, the struggle, everything had led them here, to this critical point. They had uncovered the secrets of the past, but the question remained, what would they do with that knowledge? Could they use it to destroy Krylos? To dismantle his empire, piece by piece? Or would they, like so many before them, fall victim to the same forces they had tried so hard to resist? Soraka reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm in a fleeting touch. The connection, subtle and charged, was a reminder of everything they had been through, of everything they had lost, and of everything they still had to fight for. "It's time," she said, her voice steady. "We end this." Adrian nodded, the finality of her words ringing in his chest. He could no longer deny it. The time for hesitation was over. They had no more room for doubt. It was either destroy Krylos or let his reign continue, let the galaxy bleed, let the cycle repeat itself. The decision was theirs, but the consequences rippled far beyond their reach. Turning to face the way they had come, Adrian's hand brushed against Soraka's. For a brief moment, the world felt still, as though the universe itself was waiting. The island, the storm, the dark shadows of the past, all of it fell away. It was just them, standing at the precipice of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Together they walked toward the center of the island, toward the heart of the power that would change the galaxy forever. Every step felt like a step into the unknown, but it was a path they could no longer avoid. The door was open, and beyond it, the answers awaited. The cave was silent, save for the distant echo of their footsteps, reverberating through the vast emptiness. The air was thick with the scent of ancient dust and forgotten memories. Soraka moved with purpose, her movements swift and sure, her mind focused on the task ahead. Adrian followed close behind, his thoughts racing. The final confrontation was imminent, but there was no fear in him, not anymore. There was only a singular, relentless drive, In the heart of the cave they found it, the source, the pulsing, living core of everything, the control center, a place where Krylos's empire had its roots. Adrian couldn't help but marvel at the alien technology, its dark beauty, its immense power. But even as he stood there, the full weight of their actions pressed down on him. They were about to unleash chaos, a chaos that might save or destroy everything. Siraka stepped forward. "This is it." Adrian felt the ground beneath him tremble. He knew they couldn't go back, but as Siraka activated the core, a wave of energy shot out, filling the cave with a blinding light. It was a moment that would change everything. The power surged, and Adrian's thoughts blurred as the world around him began to unravel. Then, silence. They had done it. The door had closed. The galaxy would never be the same again. But standing there, in the aftermath of their victory, Adrian felt something else, something deep and unshakable. The cost of their journey had been immense, but as he looked at Siraka, he knew they had forged something that would last far beyond the destruction of Krylos. They had won, but the echoes of their choices would never fade.